Buenos días todos. En primer, gustaría dar las gracias a los organizadores por la invitación y la oportunidad de presentar en PERUMIN. Gracias. Voy a llevar a cabo esta presentación en inglés porque mi español no es bueno. No, lo siento. Okay. Right. This talk is going to be about an analytical technique called high-resolution 3D X-ray computed tomography. It's very long. We'll shorten it to HRXCT, or maybe simply CT scanning. And what I'm going to show you is a little bit of background about the technique, but not keep it too technical, because what I want to show you are some of the applications of this technique to further understanding base and precious metal ore deposits. It's going to be quite visual, this talk, so there's going to be a few movies in it, hopefully. This is going to start working. There we go. I'll show you a larger version of this later on. This is gold in a quartz vein. Okay, so what is HRXCT? It is a totally non-destructive technique for imaging the internal structure of rocks. And it works by detecting differences in density. And because of that, it's ideal for imaging ores, because we tend to have precious metals, sulfides, oxides, in low-density materials like carbonates, silicates, etc. So there's a nice density contrast in these rocks, which means that this technique works very well. And we can get resolutions down to around about a micron. If I need to slow down for the translation, somebody let me know. Okay? So what I'm hopefully going to show you is the advantages of this over traditional 2D techniques. That's not to say that 2D techniques are redundant. In fact, I'll show you that they're as important. But this is a different way of looking at things. It's non-destructive, so we don't have to cut thin sections. It's pretty quick. And the key advantage is that you get three-dimensional textural information on your ores. Pretty good if you have very nuggety ores, where if you cut a random section, you may or may not go through your nuggets of gold or whatever. So very briefly how it works. This is one of the CT scanners that we use in the UK at University of Leicester. So that's the sort of size that we're talking about. There's a chamber inside. This is where the X-rays get emitted, and you can put your little sample in there. So that's a little piece of quartz vein with gold and other precious metals in. You instantly get an X-ray image, radiography. So this is what you might be familiar with from if you've broken a bone and gone to hospital, where X-rays go through. You get a 2D image, and the X-rays are attenuated through denser material. So you can see in here that there are little blobs of darker areas, which are the denser material in there. We'll explore that a little bit more. So we emit the X-rays, put it through the sample, and then the sample gets rotated, and we collect thousands of 2D images as that sample rotates over the course of one of these scans, which may be an hour or a few minutes for something low resolution, up to a few hours for something higher resolution. And one of the real advances in the past few years, so this technique has been around for over a decade, looking at geological material, but the processing of that data, all those thousands of 2D images, has really improved of late, and we can process that data in around sort of 5, 10, 15 minutes. So the technique works because If we pass X-rays through a material, those X-rays get attenuated by that material. And the denser the material is, the higher the attenuation, keeping it simple. So to get an image, your X-rays must be able to pass through that sample. Okay, so we do need enough energy in the X-rays to go all the way through the sample to get an image. And we can control that energy that we pass through the sample to ensure that we get enough X-rays through to get a nice image. Now, there's a little bit of a trade-off here, because if you increase the energy, what that does is it actually reduces the difference in attenuation between different minerals. So if you can see in here, we've got some common sulfide minerals there. Pentlandite has the highest attenuation, and pyrite and pyrrhotite the lowest. As you increase the energy there, the difference in attenuation becomes much less. And in practice, what that means is, if you have a very high energy going through the sample, your ability to distinguish between phases of similar densities becomes a little bit more tricky. However, what I'm going to show you today are some examples where we have really good density contrasts, and so the imaging is really good. So, as I say, there's a bit of a trade-off between sample size and resolution, okay? So if you want to keep the energy relatively low, you kind of need a fairly small sample to be able to get low energy X-rays through. So a larger sample, you might need a higher energy, but you might not be able to pick out the phases as well. So as with any technique, there's a little bit of give from one side and the other. And then what we do with those 2D images, those thousands of 2D images, is that software renders a three-dimensional image, and we can play around with that and effectively isolate or segment volumes of particular densities. So this is that rock, I think, that was in the first picture. This little histogram on the side is basically, you can effectively think of this as relative density. So we've got lots of material at this relatively low density, which is most of the silicate material in there. We start to get rid of that, and we zoom in into that area. We can start to see a little peak there, and we can segment out that histogram into different phases, okay? And we can color them as we so wish. Tend to always color gold yellow. And I'll show you some more of these images later. You can also look at these in 3D and take these three-dimensional files and 3D print them as well, so or laser etch them, which is something that we've done with one of these examples that I'm going to show you. So that's the technique. Some of you may have had a CT scan in a hospital, and it works in pretty much the same way. So what about its application then to geological research? Well, as I say, over the past 10 years or so, it's been used relatively sparsely on a range of geological materials. Metamorphic rocks, this is an example. Down here we've got isolated the pink garnets and orangey yellow staurolite. Looked at fossils. So this is actually a medical CT scanner, and those are some dinosaur eggs in there. Sedimentary rocks, meteorites. But as I mentioned earlier, those recent advances in the process time and resolution means that we've got much more application for these now. I'm mainly going to show you things where we're going to take out the high density material, the ore minerals, but also we can flip it around the other way and you can actually image pore space, so fractures, or in this case, these are vesicles in a basalt from Mount Etna in Italy. I'll show you this. not strictly geological. This is the head of King Richard III, okay, one of the English kings who was lost for hundreds of years and turned up under a car park in the city of Leicester a couple of years ago. A team at University of Leicester discovered this. You can see there's a puncture wound in his head. That's a pretty significant wound to the base of the skull, which was the end of King Richard III. Back to the geological applications. Okay, so because of the clear density in the normal phases that we see, so sulfides, oxides, precious metals, silicate, carbonate, gangue, this is probably one of the areas of geological research where CT scanning can probably add a lot of significant knowledge and value. So what I'm going to do is give you some case studies to show you that. Now, I will say at this point that it's not one technique does everything. It doesn't. It has to be used as a package with other mineralogical techniques. So what we're doing with this technique is we're identifying differences in density. We're not identifying composition itself. So you have to use this technique in concert with something like SEM or microprobe, something like that, which gives you the compositional data. And then together, as a package, it's a really powerful tool for mineral characterization. The three-dimensional textures from CT, the chemical compositions from something like SEM, giving you a mineralogical characterization. Okay, now for some examples. These applications to base and precious metal ores. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples that we've been working on over the past couple of years, where we've been working on different deposit types and applying the technique for different reasons. So I'm going to start with epithermal precious metal deposits and a case study from Turkey. So this is from working with one of our partners, Ariana Resources, in western Turkey in the Kiziltepe low sulfidation copper, gold, silver deposit. Mining is to commence very shortly. This was a few days ago. They've started breaking ground there. And it's a typical low sulfidation epithermal gold deposit. So we had a project where we were trying to increase our understanding of the paragenesis of the deposit. And we identified 4 different textural types. So this is the first one. This is a picture of half core, so there's a few centimeters across there. I've colored the gold or the gold-silver minerals here in yellow. And what we'll do here as we play this movie is strip away the quartz to reveal the distribution of where those gold and silver minerals are within that rock. Okay? So we can see that they're not distributed homogeneously. If we cut a thin section through there, for example, we wouldn't see anything. If we cut it through there, then we'd see quite a lot. So it immediately gives us a much greater degree of confidence in what we're seeing. So that's in terms of the texture. So we can classify that on its texture. This is what they look like in hand samples. So we've got these little clusters of sulfides, sometimes referred to as ginguru spots. But we need the compositional data to go with that to properly classify that style. And we found this one to be fairly silver-rich with these various silver minerals and a little bit of gold as gold sulfide. Here's one of the other styles. This is in the wall rock. If we see a vein coming through there, we'll take away the silicates, and we've got pyrite along the walls of that vein and disseminated pyrite within the host rock there. Add that to the 2D compositional data, and we found this one to be pretty gold-rich, lots of gold minerals in there with the pyrite. So we're just adding another layer of our understanding to the paragenesis of these deposits. This one, another style where we had chalcedony, and I think I need to pause that just a minute. Oops. No, I won't, because that will take too long. So we've got one of those style 1 blebs there, but we've got this sort of planar feature here coming across, which actually, when we start to take those away, this is a band of chalcedony, and the sulfides and gold around the margins of that chalcedony. And these blobs of gold are part of that style 1. So again, looking texturally, we're classifying the different styles, and then we're going in and doing the 2D analysis and finding that there is mineralogical differences as well. So altogether, it's given us quite a powerful understanding of the paragenesis here. And this is the final style, style 4. There's a vein along the side here. We take away the quartz, and you'll be able to see, just going along that plane there, a lot of little sulfides and precious metals, which we found to be a bit richer in base metals with a few bits of sphalerite, chalcopyrite, things like that. So the idea of this one, as a case study, this is where we were able to use the CT scanning together with the compositional analysis to really improve our understanding of the ore paragenesis of that deposit with these different styles. Okay, porphyries. Does it work reasonably well with porphyries? Well, we tend to have disseminated or veined sulfides, maybe some gold. The gangue will be silicate, carbonate, maybe something like anhydrite. That's quite a perfect combination. We've got nice density contrasts there. So I'm going to show you a sample of a fairly high-grade porphyry gold rock from China. So this is a typical hand sample, so we've got about 6 centimeters by 3 centimeters there. And what we'll do is we'll gradually take away the lower density material. We'll colour pyrite a sort of an orangey colour there. Get rid of that altered volcanics, and we can start to see denser phases in there, which we've segmented and coloured blue for chalcopyrite, and also some much higher density phases, which include gold. And if we look at this now, we spin this around and do that, we can start to see that that gold is associated with chalcopyrite, but along fracture planes within that rock. So there's a definite preferred orientation and a preferred association of the gold with the chalcopyrite there. So that's just a very simple, rough and ready way of getting some information on the textural distribution of your ore minerals. Different deposit type. Magmatic, nickel, copper, PGE sulfides tend to have disseminated sulfides, sometimes massive, nice high-density platinum minerals, silicate gangue, sometimes some oxides, nice combination, okay? So this is a sample from the Platte Reef in South Africa. This is essentially a rock made up of interstitial plagioclase, rounded cumulus orthopyroxene, and interstitial sulfide. So this is not a picture of the rock, this is the 3D reconstruction of the scan. And so what I'll do here is gradually strip away the low density material. So we get rid of the plagioclase and we can see that network of orthopyroxene crystals. We get rid of that, and then we can see the nature and the distribution of the sulfides in there. And if you remember back to one of the earlier slides, pentlandite has a higher attenuation, so it can actually strip away the pyrrhotite and chalcopyrite to leave us with the pentlandite within those. And then as that goes, I don't know whether you can see it on there, maybe better on the other screens, very small precious metal minerals, that's where the platinum minerals sit. This is a chromatite, so this is a scale bar there is 100 microns. And what we're looking at here are sulfides within a chromatite, but two different textural associations. So we get rid of the chromite, and you can see that there's these blobs here, which are sort of interstitial blebs, but these ones in the center here, if we bring the chromite back in, see they're actually little sulfide melt inclusions within those chromites. So what I'm going to show you now are where we've used the CT technique to actually give us a bit of information on how these sulfides have formed, the processes going on during ore formation. So these are some little rounded sulfide globules in a gabbro dike from Greenland. And they're not totally rounded because most of them have a cap at the top with coarse-grained silicates growing into the top of them. We think the reason for that is that these are rounded sulfide droplets that get trapped, but attached to them they have a little hydrous bubble or a little droplet of hydrous melt, which when they trap they form these coarse-grained caps. So let's have a look at this. This is a little piece of core, a 2 centimeter core, and what we're looking at here is a slice through it. Again, this is not the rock itself, this is not a backscattered SEM image. It looks like it. Okay, we've got the high density oxides, low density plagioclase, and mid-grays of the pyroxene. Now, keep your eyes in that corner. That's where the sulfide bleb is going to appear. And what we're going to do with this next movie is we've got the sample of core there, and we're going to gradually work our way down that, scanning down through it to reveal those textures. So here we go. Here comes the sulfide bleb. You can see with those coarse-grained silicates, we're going from top to bottom, and as you go back down through it, it turns much more rounded, and the base of it very spherical. Okay, none of those coarse-grained silicates at the base. And we can take those things out. We can take that bleb out. We can section it. Okay, we can look at the two different phases in there. So there's, in this case, pyrrhotite and chalcopyrite. The chalcopyrite are coloured yellow and the pyrrhotite red. And effectively what you can do is practice thin sectioning your rock without the need to cut it straight away. And this comes to a point where I want to make how that image that I've just shown you, scanning down through a sample, is the equivalent to hundreds or even thousands of 2D sections. So if you have a boiled egg and you slice it, okay, all those slices are slightly different, okay? So the more slices that you have, the better an idea that you have of being representative. Now, a single CT scan can effectively give you the equivalent of thousands of 2D sections. So what that does is it really increases the representativity of your data. So if we take the egg as the analogy here, if you just cut one slice through the egg, you might get that. It's 100% white, and it's quite small. Take another slice. Ooh, got a little bit of yolk in there, a bit bigger. Take a couple more. It's like, well, that's about the same volume, but the ratios between yolk and white are different. Okay, so it's just allowing us to have a much higher degree of confidence in the data that we're collecting in terms of textures and volume proportions. So the statistical significance of our data is vastly increased, and this is especially the case for nuggety ores. And as an example, I'm going to take you to Greenland now, and show you how we've applied this technique to look at tiny little nuggety ores and used that information to actually give us an insight into how these things formed. So this is the Skaergaard intrusion in East Greenland, the famous locality for igneous layering. You can see the layering coming across here, dipping down towards the fjord there. And it's host to a deposit called the Platinova Reef, which is a palladium gold stratiform magmatic sulfide. Now, whereas that is quite spectacular, in terms of the actual mineralization, it's one of the least spectacular ore deposits that you'll ever see, because the mineralization is just hosted within gabbros. You have tiny little droplets of copper sulfide with palladium and gold alloys, and they're invisible in the core. You can't see them, they are so small. That's an example of what they look like. That's a big one at 100 microns, okay? So we wanted to investigate these tiny little droplets because they have extremely high metal tenors, up to percent level gold and palladium within them. So because these are so tiny and they're so well distributed, looking at 2D sections means that we have to take hundreds to be able to gather enough information to make something of that. So instead, or in addition to that, we applied micro CT to this. So this is a tiny little core which is only 2 millimeters across. And again, we're going down. This is ilmenite, pyroxene, and plagioclase. And you can see we're going down and there's no sulfide there yet. The sulfides will pick out, there's one down at the bottom, as brighter specks, okay? And you can see how if you were doing this in 2D sections, the chances of actually hitting these things, there's one there, are quite small. But being able to do this, we can pluck out a lot of data about where these things sit. And we found them to be mostly on grain boundaries or as inclusions within the pyroxene or the oxides, but not the plagioclase. The plagioclase appears to have been there already when the sulfide forms. Take a look over at this grain of ilmenite, and as we go through there, see one of these little rounded inclusions of sulfide, precious metal, and another little one there. And any 2D sectioning, you can never be totally sure whether what you're seeing is at a 2-grain boundary, a 3-grain boundary, or as an inclusion. This gives us unequivocal evidence of those textural associations. And what we can do is we can take those little sulfides out, okay? We can segment them out, get rid of all the other things, and have a look at what they look like. So this is about 50 microns across. The yellow is the sulfide, so these little rounded droplets of copper sulfide, and the red there is a little palladium or gold mineral. And what we did was we plucked out these tiny little rounded droplets, and we found that there was quite a variation in the ratio between sulfide droplets and the precious metal minerals, up to the point where this one's quite a lot. These were nicknamed eyeballs because of the in this paper that was published last year. This is a sulfide with a single palladium mineral on it. Looks a bit like an eyeball. Okay, and we found that there's a real variation. These ones, almost totally precious metals with only a little bit of sulfide. So there's a real variation there. If the others are eyeballs, maybe that one is a brain, and that one, to me, looks like a Swiss Army knife. So you've got the toothpick on the end, and there's the corkscrew as well. But that is what it looks like. It's probably a one-off. Now, this variability that you see in the ratio between precious metals and sulfides, you can see them in 2D. This is an image from a paper of the same sulfides, but a 2D study. And you can see this one up here, B, has a very small precious metal mineral, large sulfide. This one down here, N, very large precious metal mineral, small sulfide. But with the 2D technique, there's no way of knowing whether that is real, that variation, or whether it is simply an artifact of where you've sliced the egg, okay? So we do need the 2D techniques to be able to give us the compositions, but adding the 3D data allows us to understand that variability being real. And we applied this to ore deposit models. Basically, the usual model for forming high tenor sulfides is that your sulfide droplets react with a lot of silicate magma in the classic R factor model. But this doesn't work for these because we've got tiny little droplets which were trapped in situ. They cannot have actually interacted with enough magma. So what's happened? Maybe we've dissolved the sulfides. So you start off with a sulfide which collects PG in it, but then redissolves back into the magma. That can happen, and in which case elements like the PGs, they have high partition coefficients into the sulfide. So if you dissolve that sulfide, the PG will stay in there and increase the tenor. And if you do that on a droplet by droplet scale, you can get that variability. Oops. Or, another possibility, maybe we actually just preform, saturate the platinum minerals themselves. So in the magma, we actually saturate in palladium copper alloys, and then the sulfide nucleates on these, okay? And depending on how long they have to grow before they get trapped into that cooling crystal mush, will give you that variability in the sulfide precious metal ratio. So we're using this technique in concert with other techniques to provide us evidence for physical processes involved in ore formation. And it's giving us data for tiny little nuggety ores, which is equivalent to thousands of those 2D sections. There we do. Okay. Last deposit type that I want to show you an example of are some orogenic gold deposits. So again, we have a few disseminated sulfides in these. We've got gold, very high density. It's also generally quite nuggety. And you've got low density gangue. Excellent combination to be able to apply this technique well. I have to say it doesn't work for everything. I'm showing you some examples of where it works well, and having that density contrast in there is one of the key things. So here's a gold sulfide vein sample containing pyrite, galena, and electrum. So we removed the silicates here, so we're just showing the sulfides there. We'll get rid of the lower density pyrite, and we've got galena in blue there, and we can get rid of that, and we're left with the electrum. And what we're seeing here is that there is a good correlation texturally between where the gold is and where that galena is, and not necessarily where the pyrite is. So immediately, it's given us a good feel for the associations and some paragenetic information. You can zoom in on that, you can see the gold in here associated more with those galenas. This is an example of a, I guess, relatively rare orogenic gold deposit on the coast in Chile, just north of, a couple of 100 kilometers north of Santiago. We published this in a paper which is, I think it's actually in the current issue of Mineralium Depositor, if you want to have a look at that. And we used the CT scanning as part of a wide-ranging approach to look at a multi-stage gold paragenesis. So we've got 1, 2, 3 different styles. The first one, again, we used the SEM techniques to identify gold, arsenopyrite, and then we did some CT scanning of that, and then that gives us that 3-dimensional textural associations. And we found that we've got these nice euhedral pyrites in here, and it's within those pyrites that we get the gold there. There was a second style where gold was associated with galena, a little bit like in that last example that I showed you. And then a much more nuggety style where there's no base metal sulfides at all. It's just simply, this is one of my favorite little samples. This is about 2.5 centimeters. On the surface, you can see a little dusting of gold. You scan it, take away that quartz, and you can see a great big nugget or cluster of gold within there, showing how nuggety that style is. This one's quite a spectacularly high-grade sample, and this shows a dendritic style of gold. We'll take away the sulfides there, we'll zoom in a little bit. That's the edge of the vein there, and you're able to see those that gold growing into that vein. I'll just do that again. There it is. And the brown there is some pyrite, which is also in that quartz vein. So that's good. Certainly you can get some fantastic images, and it is a very visual technique, but you can also get some quantitative data out of this as well. In terms of grain size analysis. So if you have disseminated ores, or, well, indeed, anything, if you can segment your different phases, what you're able to do then is you can analyze the size and shape of individual grains, and also potentially quantify grade without destructive assay. So, for example, if you have a sample of a very simple quartz vein system with gold in it, and you know the density of the gold or electrum that's in there, you know the volume of the sample, you can take away, isolate the volume of gold in there, and this will give you total volumes. I'll just zoom in on that table here. So for every grain that we've isolated here, you can get a volume, an X, Y, Z dimensions, and you can therefore work out a volume of gold in a volume of sample. You can work out its grade without sending it off to the lab. A rough grade. I wouldn't base a resource estimate on it, but it'll give you an idea of that. And what it also does is allow you to look at those nuggety ores. You can perform volumetric proportion analysis. So this could be as simple as how much pyroxene, plagioclase, and olivine have I got in my olivine gabbro. You can do that. You can flip it the other way and say how much pore space have I got in there, and do volumetric proportional analysis. And that's an alternative to point counting, if anyone's done that before. It's long and tedious. And you as well get a little bit more data than you might for a quantitative SEM analysis, which of course gives you compositional data, it gives you proportions, but it is only in 2D. This gives you, it literally gives you an extra dimension. Okay, so I'll summarize that. I'll put the dendritic gold up again because that's a good one. So it's a non-destructive technique. Its main advantage is that it gives you three-dimensional textural information, and therefore a lot of increased confidence over 2D analysis, ideal for things like nuggety ores and where you have a clear density contrast. If you don't have the density contrast, it won't work very well because that's what it is based on. So for example, if you're looking at a fossil which is preserved in calcite and the material that it's sat in is a limestone, there's not really any density contrast there, so this isn't a great technique for that. But where you've got ore minerals, pretty good. It does require complementary compositional analysis because you have to ground truth your differences in density with an SEM or a microprobe technique. But it can be applied to paragenetic studies. Our understanding of just increases, adds another level to our understanding of how these mineralized systems and mineral associations form. It can be applied to metallurgical studies, the textures, the distribution of different phases, and we can do quantitative data analysis on that, either volumetrically or grain by grain in terms of size. So, gracias, and I'll just say that we have another talk from the University of Leicester tomorrow. My colleague Gowan Jenkin is giving a talk in room 2 over there on environmentally friendly ore processing techniques, some novel approaches. So if you're interested in that, turn up 9:30 tomorrow. Okay? Gracias.